Thinking about living close to your children in old age? It might sound like a good idea, but in this video, we're revealing why it could actually be a big mistake. From personal freedom to unexpected challenges, the truth might surprise you. Stick around till the end for a shocking insight that could change your plans for good. Number 1. Increased risk of role reversal, where children feel obligated to parent their parents. Let's be real, when you live close to your kids in your later years, there's this unspoken expectation that they'll swoop in whenever you need help. And while that might sound comforting at first, it's not always a win-win. Over time, it can create this weird flip in dynamics. Suddenly, the parent-child relationship you've known your whole life isn't the same anymore. The roles start to blur, and before anyone realizes it, the kids are parenting you. Think about it. You raised them, cared for them, made sacrifices to give them a good life. Now, they might feel it's their turn to return the favor. And sure, it's natural to want to help the people who raised you, but when that help becomes a constant expectation, it can breed all kinds of tension. Your kids might feel obligated to check in on you, manage your appointments, or even make decisions you'd normally handle yourself. What started as love and concern can morph into stress and resentment. For you, it might feel like losing control. No one wants to feel like they're being managed, especially by their own kids. The independence you fought to maintain throughout your life starts to slip away, not because you're incapable, but because it's easier for your children to take over than to let you do things on your own. This isn't anyone's fault. It's just how things go when proximity and obligation collide. And here's the kicker, your kids might not even realize what's happening. They'll think they're just being helpful. "Oh, let me handle that for you, Dad." Or, "Mom, don't worry about it. I've got it." Harmless, right? But over time, these little acts of help can chip away at your sense of autonomy. You might start relying on them for things you used to do without a second thought, and that dependency? It's a slippery slope. On the flip side, your kids' lives aren't standing still. They've got their own families, careers, and dreams to chase. Balancing all of that while feeling responsible for their parents can be overwhelming. It's not hard to imagine how guilt sneaks in. If they're not there for you, they feel like bad kids. If they are there for you, they might feel like they're losing themselves. It's a lose-lose situation that no one really signs up for, but somehow, it happens anyway. Living close to your children might seem like the perfect arrangement, but it can unintentionally create this invisible pressure for them to step up and take care of you in ways they never anticipated. It's not just about asking for help, it's about the mental and emotional weight that comes with being so nearby. That proximity makes it harder for everyone to establish boundaries, those invisible lines that say, "Hey, I'm still capable, and I need you to live your life too." So, before you pack up and move to be closer to your kids, think about how this role reversal might play out. You want them to love you, not feel obligated to parent you. It's a delicate balance, and sometimes, a little distance can be the key to keeping that balance intact. Number 2. Potential neglect of your own hobbies or passions to fit into their routine. When you live close to your kids as you grow older, there's this unspoken expectation. Sometimes it's subtle, other times it feels like a neon sign blinking in your face, to prioritize their lives over your own. It's natural to want to be there for them, to help when they need you, to be a dependable presence. But here's where it can get tricky. Without even realizing it, you might start bending your schedule, hobbies, and passions to align with theirs. And slowly, without fanfare or drama, the things that once lit you up can dim or even disappear altogether. Think about it. You might be someone who loves painting, gardening, or diving deep into a great book. Maybe you've always dreamed of taking that pottery class or finally learning to play the piano. But when your kids are nearby, it's all too easy to put those things on the back burner. They call and need a last-minute babysitter. Sure, you'll be there. Their car breaks down and they need a ride? Of course, no problem. Or maybe they're just having a bad day, and you drop everything to be their sounding board. And before you know it, your time, the precious, unrepeatable hours you could have spent pursuing your own joy, gets eaten up by their demands, no matter how well-intentioned they might be. It's not that they're trying to take over your life. Most of the time, they're not even aware it's happening. But proximity makes it easy. When you're close, you're the first person they think of when they need help, advice, or even just company. And because you're you, loving, caring, and always wanting the best for them, you say yes more often than you should. That pottery class? It's postponed for the third time because there's a school play to attend or a dinner you're roped into. That book club you joined? It fizzles out because you just can't seem to make the time. The kicker is, you might not even notice how much you're giving up at first. It creeps in slowly. But over time, this pattern of always being on call can lead to a loss of identity. Your life begins to revolve around theirs, and the vibrant, curious person you were starts to fade. And let's be honest, resentment can sneak in. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but a quiet, nagging feeling of "what about me?" It's uncomfortable to admit because you love your kids, and you genuinely want to help. But love doesn't mean losing yourself in the process. So here's the thing, living close to your children can be wonderful in many ways, but it's essential to protect your space and passions. Setting boundaries isn't about being selfish, it's about staying whole. You deserve to have a life that's rich, exciting, and uniquely yours, no matter how old you are. Because, at the end of the day, your happiness matters too. Number 3, loss of personal space for both parties. Let's face it, moving closer to your kids when you're older might sound like a sweet, heartwarming idea. You picture family dinners, spontaneous visits, and bonding with the grandkids. But here's the kicker, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. One of the biggest issues? Losing personal space. And it's not just your space, it's theirs too. Think about it. You've spent years, maybe decades, creating a life that works for you. You have your routines, your quirks, your way of doing things. Maybe you like your mornings quiet with a strong cup of tea, or you've got a hobby that takes over half the living room. Moving closer to your kids often means adjusting or outright giving up those comforts. Suddenly, you might feel obligated to be on call just because you're nearby. Dropping in unannounced or being expected to babysit at the drop of a hat might sound innocent at first, but it can pile up and start feeling like an invasion of your time. You wanted closeness, but what you get is pressure. Now flip the coin. Your kids, as much as they love you, also have their lives. They're juggling work, parenting, relationships, and their own need for downtime. Throwing you into the mix, even if you're the most easygoing parent in the world, can feel like an extra layer of responsibility. They might feel like they need to entertain you more often, or they might worry about setting boundaries for fear of hurting your feelings. Over time, this can create tension. You end up tiptoeing around each other, trying not to step on toes while still wanting to stay connected. And let's talk about boundaries, because they get blurry real fast. Living nearby can make it hard to establish a healthy sense of separation. Imagine you're used to making decisions for yourself, whether it's how to spend your weekend or what kind of support you need. Now, being so close to your kids, they might feel entitled to weigh in, even when you don't ask for their input. Why don't you come over for dinner again? Or don't you think it's time you stop driving at night? Their intentions might be good, but it can come across as meddling. Suddenly, you're not the independent person you used to be, you're the parent who's being parented. And let's not ignore the flip side, you might find yourself doing a bit of meddling too. It's hard not to, right? If you see them making choices you don't agree with, being close by makes it way too tempting to chime in. What starts as a helpful suggestion can feel like an intrusion to them. That's when resentment starts brewing, quietly but steadily. Ultimately, personal space isn't just physical. It's emotional and psychological too. When you lose it, you can start feeling trapped, both of you. Instead of bringing you closer together, proximity can actually create friction. And who wants that? Number 4, financial challenges or expectations. Money, it's always a tricky subject, right? But when you live close to your kids in your later years, it can become this quiet undercurrent in your relationship that nobody talks about, yet everyone feels. The thing is, finances have this sneaky way of creeping into the dynamics between parents and children, especially when proximity makes it so easy for boundaries to blur. First off, there's the assumption, whether spoken or unspoken, that being nearby means someone's going to foot the bill for something. Maybe you're retired and living on a fixed income, and that's fine, until unexpected expenses start popping up. Repairs, medical costs, groceries when inflation's gone wild, it all adds up. And guess who's right there, a stone's throw away? Your kids. The ones who probably already have enough on their financial plate. It's easy for them to feel like they have to step in, even if you don't outright ask. And let's not pretend this only flows one way. Parents might think, I'm so close to my kids, I should help them out. Maybe they're trying to save for a house, or they're drowning in daycare fees. You might feel like it's your duty to pitch in because, hey, you're family, right? But let's be real, giving them money when you're supposed to be focusing on your own financial stability? That's a fast track to running out of resources when you need them most. And then what? You're both in a bind, and nobody wins. The kicker is, nobody wants to talk about it. Who's going to sit at the dinner table and say, hey, about that money thing? It's awkward. So instead, the tension builds quietly, like a pressure cooker. Your kids might start feeling like your proximity comes with strings attached, strings tied to their wallets. Or you might begin to resent how much you're expected to chip in for things you didn't budget for. It's a recipe for resentment, even if everyone involved has the best intentions. There's also the social aspect of it. When you live nearby, there's this natural assumption that you'll do more things together, family outings, shared meals, holiday trips. But let's face it, all those little things cost money, and if someone's always picking up the tab, it can create this weird imbalance. Maybe your kids start to feel like you're leaning on them too much, or maybe you start to feel like their generosity comes with conditions. Either way, it's not a good vibe. And then there's the long-term stuff. What happens when the money runs out? If you're too close, your kids might feel like they have no choice but to step in and support you financially. That's a heavy load to carry, especially when they're trying to build their own nest egg or plan for their own retirement. It's not about whether they want to help, it's about whether they should have to. So here's the deal, living near your kids can come with financial expectations, some subtle, some not so subtle, that can strain your relationship. Whether it's you feeling like you owe them, or them feeling like they owe you, the money talk gets messier the closer you are. And honestly, it's not worth jeopardizing the love and respect you have for each other. Sometimes, a little distance isn't just good for your independence, it's good for your bank account too. Number 5. Pressure to conform to their social circle and norms. Let's be real, when you live close to your kids, there's a subtle, unspoken pressure to fit into their world. In this world, it's not just about their family routine or personal lives, it includes their friends, their neighbors, and their social norms. Suddenly, you find yourself navigating a new, often unfamiliar dynamic, one that might not feel entirely comfortable or natural to you. It starts small. Maybe you're invited to a barbecue or a neighborhood get-together. Seems harmless enough, right? But then you notice it's not just an occasional invite, it's an expectation. Your kids' friends want to get to know you. Your kids want you to be part of the group. It can feel like you're being gently nudged, or downright shoved, into a social circle you didn't choose. A circle where the conversations might not resonate with you, where the jokes don't quite land, or where the vibe just isn't your thing. Yet, because you're nearby, saying no feels like you're breaking some unwritten rule. And then there's the cultural or behavioral piece of it. Maybe their circle operates differently than what you're used to. Perhaps they're more formal, or less. Maybe they have a particular way of hosting dinners, celebrating holidays, or even just interacting day to day. Over time, you might feel this unrelenting pull to adapt, blend in, conform, go with the flow. It can be exhausting, this quiet balancing act of trying to stay true to yourself while not rocking the boat. What's tricky is that this pressure isn't necessarily malicious. Your kids might genuinely think they're doing you a favor by introducing you to their friends or encouraging you to get involved. But even well-meaning efforts can feel stifling when they clash with how you'd prefer to spend your time or who you'd choose to connect with. And let's not forget the norms. These are the silent, often invisible rules that govern behavior in any group. When you're around your kids and their social circles, you might find yourself second-guessing the way you dress, the opinions you voice, or even the jokes you crack. Are you too old-fashioned? Are you trying too hard? It's like walking on a tightrope, trying to strike a balance between being accepted and being authentic. That's a lot of emotional labor, especially when you've already spent a lifetime navigating social expectations. Now imagine how all of this stacks up over time. Little by little, the pressure to conform can chip away at your sense of individuality. The things that make you, might start to feel less important. And that's the real risk, losing yourself in an effort to fit into a world that, let's be honest, isn't really yours. Living close to your kids can be great for some reasons, sure. But it's important to remember that proximity doesn't mean you have to mold yourself into their lives, or their circles. You've earned the right to live your golden years on your own terms, unapologetically and authentically. Hold on to that. Number 6, limited ability to make independent life decisions. Let's get real, moving close to your kids might feel like a good idea at first. You picture having support when you need it and being more involved in their lives. But what people don't talk about enough is how this decision can mess with your independence. And not just in the obvious ways, it can sneak up on you, in small, subtle moments, until one day you realize you're not calling the shots in your own life anymore. When you live nearby, it's almost inevitable that your kids will start weighing in on your choices. At first, it might feel helpful. They suggest which doctor to see, which grocery store has the best deals, or even whether you should get that leaky faucet fixed. It seems like they're just looking out for you, right? But then it starts to creep further. Suddenly, you're second-guessing things you never thought twice about before. Should you really go on that weekend trip alone? Should you splurge on that hobby you've been wanting to try? Their opinions can start feeling like invisible guidelines, and before you know it, you're following their lead instead of your own instincts. Here's the tricky part, it's often well-intentioned. Your kids aren't trying to take over your life, at least not deliberately. They just want you to be safe, happy, and comfortable. But there's a fine line between offering support and steering the wheel for you. Living so close means they see more of your day-to-day life, and with that comes the temptation for them to intervene. Maybe they start suggesting you shouldn't drive at night anymore or that you should change your diet because they read some article online. It can feel less like advice and more like they're trying to manage you. And let's not ignore the social aspect. Proximity can mean they expect you to prioritize their needs and routines over your own. What if you want to join a book club that meets at the same time they want you to babysit? What if you're invited to a new friend's dinner party, but your kids think you should spend that evening at their house instead? Even if they're not outright controlling, the guilt or pressure to do the right thing can start influencing your decisions in ways you didn't expect. This can snowball into a deeper issue, losing your sense of self. Independence isn't just about making practical choices like where to shop or what to eat. It's about feeling like you're in charge of your life, that your choices are yours alone. When your kids are close enough to have a constant say, it's easy to feel like your autonomy is slipping away. And let's be honest, no matter how much you love your family, nobody wants to feel like they're being micromanaged. In the end, living close to your children might seem convenient, but it comes with a price, your ability to make decisions freely. And that, my friend, is a trade-off worth thinking twice about. Number 7, unhealthy emotional dependence on your children. Let's talk about something no one really likes to admit, how living close to your kids in your later years can sometimes turn into this emotional entanglement that's, well, not exactly healthy. You move near them, thinking it'll be great, more time together, more connection. But before you know it, there's this invisible line you've crossed. What started as just being nearby can slide into something that feels a lot like emotional dependence. And let's be honest, that's not good for anyone. Here's the thing, being close makes it easy, too easy, to rely on your kids for emotional support. Feeling lonely? Just pop by. Need someone to vent to? Call them up, they're right there. While it's totally fine to lean on family for comfort, there's a point where it can start to feel like they're your emotional crutch. And that's a heavy load to put on someone else, even if it's your kid. They might not say it, but they'll feel it. For your children, it can be overwhelming. They might start to feel like they need to be your constant source of happiness, like it's their job to make sure you're okay emotionally. That's a lot of pressure, especially when they're already juggling their own lives. Careers, relationships, kids of their own, your emotional needs could unintentionally compete with all that. It's not because they don't love you, it's because no one person should have to be someone else's everything. And let's not forget how this can affect you. When you depend on your kids to fill your emotional gaps, you risk losing sight of your own independence. Maybe you stop reaching out to friends or exploring hobbies because, hey, your kids are just a call away. But here's the deal, that kind of reliance can shrink your world. It's like trading a full, vibrant life for a smaller, safer bubble, and that's not what anyone wants for themselves, right? The emotional dependence can also breed frustration on both sides. You might feel hurt if your kids don't have the time or energy to give you the attention you're craving. Meanwhile, they might feel guilty for not being able to meet your expectations. It's a cycle of unmet needs and unspoken resentments that no one wants to be trapped in, yet it happens more often than people realize. And let's not even get started on boundaries, or the lack of them. Living close can make it hard to draw those lines between your life and theirs. You might find yourself showing up unannounced or expecting them to drop everything when you're having a bad day. It's not because you're trying to overstep. It's because proximity makes it easy to blur the lines between I need support and I need space. At the end of the day, emotional dependence might start innocently enough, out of love, out of a desire to stay connected. But it can quickly spiral into something that stifles both you and your kids. A little distance, both physical and emotional, can go a long way in keeping your relationship healthy and respectful. Because let's face it, you raised them to fly, not to carry the weight of your emotional world. Keep that in mind, and you'll both be better off. Number 8, unintended competition for authority in the household. Here's a scenario, you're living close to your kids, and everything seems great at first. But then, slowly, you notice this odd, underlying tension creeping in. It's not a full-blown argument or an obvious conflict, but it's there, this subtle push and pull over who's really calling the shots. Living near your kids can sometimes lead to an unintended clash of authority, especially when you're stepping into their household dynamic. And let's face it, that's a recipe for frustration on both sides. The tricky part is that no one sets out to create this competition. It just happens. You've spent years running your own household, making decisions, and doing things your way. That sense of authority, of being the one in charge, doesn't just disappear because you've moved into a new phase of life. Meanwhile, your kids are running their household now, with their own routines, rules, and rhythms. When these two worlds collide, even with the best intentions, things can get messy. It might start small. You notice how they handle something, parenting their kids, managing their budget, decorating their home, and you think, that's not how I do it. Maybe you make a suggestion. Or two. At first, it feels harmless, like you're just offering advice. But over time, those little comments can start to feel intrusive to them, like you're questioning their choices or undermining their decisions. And let's be honest, they might push back, maybe not with words, but with a shift in tone or body language that says, "This is my house now." On the flip side, you might feel that same kind of resistance. Maybe they start making assumptions about your life, how you spend your time, what you eat, who you see. Proximity can sometimes blur boundaries, making your life feel like an extension of theirs. And before you know it, there's this unspoken tug of war. Who gets the final say? Whose way is right? Here's the kicker. These little power struggles can seep into the most mundane aspects of life. From how the laundry is folded to what's served at dinner, even the smallest differences in habits or expectations can become points of friction. It's not that anyone's trying to dominate, it's just that you're both used to being in charge. The emotional toll? That's where it really gets sticky. Feeling like you're constantly walking on eggshells to avoid stepping on toes can be exhausting. And for your kids, they might start to feel like they have to prove they're capable of handling things without your input, which can create distance instead of closeness. The worst part? It's also unnecessary. Nobody wants a power struggle, but proximity can make it hard to avoid. Living close to your kids can be wonderful, no doubt about it. But maintaining clear boundaries and respecting each other's autonomy is critical. Sometimes, a little distance, physical and emotional, can actually strengthen relationships. It gives everyone the space to lead their own lives without feeling like they're in a constant battle for control. Because at the end of the day, love doesn't mean agreeing on everything, it means giving each other the freedom to do things their own way. Number 9. Risk of being unintentionally sidelined as children prioritize their nuclear family. Here's a reality check. Moving closer to your kids doesn't automatically guarantee a front row seat in their lives. In fact, it might leave you feeling like an extra in a story you thought you'd be starring in. It's not about them loving you less or being neglectful. It's just that life gets messy, and priorities shift. When push comes to shove, their nuclear family, their spouse, kids, and work usually takes center stage, leaving you somewhere in the wings. At first, it might not seem like a big deal. You move closer, excited to see them more often, thinking you'll be all bonding and togetherness. But as you settle in, you might start noticing patterns. Their schedules are jam-packed. Work deadlines, soccer practice, weekend birthday parties, it never ends. They're rushing around, trying to keep their heads above water, and you end up as a bystander to the chaos. It's not intentional, but you start to feel like you're competing for their attention. Here's where it gets tricky. Because you're close by, they might assume, oh, mom's just down the road, she's always around. That closeness can breed complacency. Ironically, the more accessible you are, the easier it becomes for them to take your presence for granted. You might find yourself waiting for an invitation, a call, or even just a moment of their time. And when it doesn't come, or comes less frequently than you'd hoped, it stings. Then there's the fact that their nuclear family naturally takes priority. It's not a bad thing, it's just how life works. Their partner and kids are their immediate world, the ones they see and think about every day. Even if they want to include you, there's only so much room in their lives for extra layers of responsibility or emotional energy. Dinner plans might get postponed because the kids have homework. That promised outing might turn into, "Sorry, we're swamped this weekend." And while you understand, a part of you feels left out. Over time, this sidelining can shift the dynamics of your relationship. You might start hesitating to ask for their time, worried about being a burden. They, on the other hand, might assume you're fine because, well, you haven't said otherwise. It creates a subtle but growing distance, a paradox where physical closeness doesn't translate to emotional connection. And let's not ignore how this can affect your self-esteem. Being sidelined, even unintentionally, can leave you questioning your place in their lives. You might feel like you're walking a tightrope, trying to balance being involved without overstepping. That's exhausting, and it can lead to feelings of loneliness or resentment, even if you try to brush them off. In the end, the harsh truth is that living close to your kids doesn't guarantee you'll feel close to them. Their lives are full, their priorities are elsewhere, and sometimes, you end up on the outside looking in. It's not about blame, it's just a dynamic worth considering before making that big move. Number 10. Strain on their marriage or partnerships due to proximity. Let's talk about a touchy subject: how living close to your kids can sometimes throw a wrench into their marriage or partnership. It's not something anyone plans for, but when you move just around the corner, or even into the same neighborhood, your presence can unintentionally create some tension. And no, it's not about being a bad parent or overbearing. It's about how proximity can complicate the delicate balance of a relationship that isn't yours to navigate. Here's the deal: relationships thrive on boundaries. Couples need their own space to connect, argue, make decisions, and just be. When you're close by, those boundaries can get fuzzy real quick. Maybe you swing by unannounced to drop something off or invite them over for dinner, harmless, right? But over time, even little things can feel intrusive, especially if one partner feels like their time, energy, or attention is being redirected too often toward you. And let's be honest, your kid might feel caught in the middle. They love you. They also love their spouse or partner. Now imagine the awkward position they're in if those two worlds start clashing. If their partner feels like you're around too much, even if you're not trying to be, it can create friction between them. And that friction? It can build up in all kinds of sneaky, stressful ways. Arguments over small things, like whose turn it is to visit or why you were asked to babysit instead of someone else, can snowball into bigger issues. What makes it trickier is that nobody wants to hurt your feelings. Your kid doesn't want to tell you to back off. Their partner might not want to say anything at all, out of fear of seeming disrespectful. So instead of having an honest conversation, resentment brews quietly in the background. It's like an invisible weight on their relationship, a weight that only grows heavier with time. Proximity can also create a sense of obligation that wasn't there before. If you live far away, your visits feel intentional, even special. But when you're close, the expectation to see each other more often is almost automatic. That might sound great in theory, but for couples who are already balancing busy schedules, it can feel like another to-do on the list. Add in the natural stressors of marriage, money, kids, work, and your closeness can start to feel like one more thing to juggle. Then there's the power dynamic to consider. Let's say you offer advice or share opinions about their home, their parenting style, or their life choices. Even with the best intentions, your input can sometimes feel like meddling, especially to the person who married your kid. It's not personal, it's just that partnerships are built on mutual decision-making. When a third party, yes, even a beloved parent, gets too involved, it can shake that foundation. At the end of the day, living close to your children doesn't just involve you and them, it affects everyone in their household. Their partner, their kids, even their routines. A little distance, both physical and emotional, can help keep things harmonious. Because while you might love the idea of being nearby, the last thing you want is to create tension in the relationships that matter most to them. Respect their space, trust their love for you, and remember that sometimes, love grows best when it's given a little breathing room. Number 11, risk of overstepping boundaries. Boundaries. They're a funny thing, aren't they? Invisible lines that everyone knows exist but no one really talks about. When you live close to your kids in your later years, those boundaries can become a bit blurry. And let's be honest, overstepping them? It's not always intentional, but it's almost inevitable. The tricky part is, once those lines get crossed, it can create friction that's hard to smooth out. Think about it. You're right there, just a stone's throw away, and it's easy to get caught up in their lives. Maybe it starts small, dropping by unannounced because you were in the neighborhood. Or commenting on how they're raising their kids or handling their finances because, hey, you've been through it all before and just want to help. But here's the thing, what feels like care or involvement to you can sometimes feel like interference or judgment to them. It's a delicate dance, and one misstep can make things awkward fast. The problem is, proximity makes it so tempting. You see their routines up close, hear about their challenges in real time, and naturally, you want to jump in. Offer advice. Lend a hand. Fix things. But what starts as well-meaning input can quickly snowball into overstepping. Your kids might not say it outright, many won't, but they might start pulling back, guarding their space, and suddenly you're left wondering, what did I do wrong? The answer, most of the time, isn't that you did something wrong, it's just that boundaries got a little tangled along the way. And let's talk about how they might overstep your boundaries, too. Living close doesn't just open the door for you to step into their world, it invites them to step into yours. Maybe they start assuming they know what's best for you, how you should spend your time, who you should see, or even what you should eat. It can feel like they're managing your life instead of letting you live it, and that's not exactly a recipe for happiness. Before long, both sides can feel a little stifled. Here's the tough part, nobody's doing it on purpose. You love your kids, and they love you. But love doesn't always mean knowing where the line is, especially when physical closeness makes it so easy to blur. Conversations about boundaries can feel uncomfortable, even unnecessary, but they're essential. Because without clear limits, even the strongest relationships can feel strained. And let's be real, when those boundaries are crossed too often, it can lead to resentment. Not the dramatic, shouting match kind of resentment, but a quieter, nagging frustration. A sense that your life isn't quite your own anymore or that you're constantly walking on eggshells to avoid stepping on theirs. Living near your kids can absolutely work, but it requires effort, on both sides, to keep those boundaries intact. Sometimes, a little space, both literal and emotional, is the best way to preserve the closeness and respect that make those relationships thrive. After all, love doesn't need constant proximity. It needs balance, understanding, and a healthy respect for where one life ends and another begins. Number 12, potential for family conflicts. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, conflict. Moving closer to your kids in your later years might seem like a loving, practical decision, but it can also open the door to a whole lot of drama. And here's the thing, it's rarely about big, explosive fights. No, it's usually the little things that pile up over time, like dust under a rug, until one day, someone snaps. Living nearby creates opportunities for connection, sure, but it also creates opportunities for friction. Maybe it's differences in lifestyle or opinions. Maybe it's unspoken expectations that lead to disappointment. When you're just a quick drive, or even a few houses away, it's easy for boundaries to blur. And blurred boundaries are like a recipe for tension, especially in families where everyone already has their quirks, habits, and emotional baggage. One of the big triggers? Misaligned expectations. You might move closer thinking you'll see your kids often, share meals, and be an integral part of their lives. But they might be imagining something very different, occasional visits, help when needed, but lots of space. Or vice versa. Maybe they think you'll be thrilled to babysit their kids on short notice or join every family outing, and you're sitting there thinking, I just wanted some quiet time to read. When these expectations clash, and it can lead to misunderstandings, frustration, and hurt feelings. And let's not forget about generational differences. You've lived a whole life, developed your own way of doing things. Your kids have too. Now you're in each other's orbits more than ever, and those differences can start to rub. Maybe you have opinions on how they're raising their children or running their household. Maybe they think you're too set in your ways or too vocal about things that aren't your business. Even the tiniest comments, like how they cook their food or what they spend money on, can spark arguments. These aren't major battles, but over time, they can chip away at your relationship. The proximity also makes it easier for conflicts to simmer. When you're farther away, little disagreements tend to fade because you're not around to stew over them. But when you're close, every small annoyance can feel magnified. A passive-aggressive comment here, a cold shoulder there, and suddenly there's a tension in the air that no one wants to address. It's exhausting. On top of that, your presence might inadvertently create tension between your child and their spouse. Family dynamics are tricky enough without adding a parent into the mix. Maybe your child feels torn between pleasing you and maintaining harmony in their own home. Maybe their spouse feels judged or overshadowed by your involvement. These unspoken dynamics can spiral into full-blown issues if left unchecked. At the end of the day, proximity doesn't just amplify love and support, it can also amplify irritations and disagreements. That's not to say conflict is inevitable, but it's something to think about. Because once those tensions creep in, it's not always easy to untangle them. And the last thing anyone wants is for a well-meaning decision to put cracks in the family foundation. Thanks for watching. I hope this video gave you a new perspective on why living close to your children in old age might not always be the best decision. It's important to consider all factors before making such a big choice. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe for more thought-provoking content, and share it with others who might benefit. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.